Paranormal M shines a light on the mysteries of the night. From cursed places to haunted objects, nothing is hidden. Subscribe now, your journey begins here, it would seem. The Ghost in the Corridor. Never really shared this with anyone before, maybe because I didn't want people to think I was making things up. But there are a few strange things that happened in my life that I still can't explain. I'll try to write them down here, hoping somebody might help me make sense of it. I grew up in a very religious family. We often joked about living in a spiritual house because sometimes the TV would flicker on in the middle of the night. Maybe the radio would start playing static for no reason. The house itself wasn't ancient or anything. It was built about 45 years ago. It was by my grandfather. No one had ever reported anything odd before. And there were 3 things that happened to me over the years, things I can't rationally explain. And oddly enough, in all 3 incidents, my younger sister, who's 3 years younger than me, they were somehow involved. The door that breathed. I was about 10. Our whole family was visiting our grandparents in the countryside. And one afternoon, my sister and I were upstairs in this big wool blanket, playing some made-up game. The house was quiet. Then we noticed the old wooden door handle starting to move. At first, it tilted slightly, like someone was gently testing it, maybe. We laughed nervously, thinking our cousin was messing with us. But when we called out to them, no answer. The handle kept moving, slowly pressing down, and the door creaked open just a few inches. There was no one outside, no footsteps, just the steady, deliberate movement of the door like it was breathing. Then all at once the door swung fully open, quiet and controlled, and stayed that way for several seconds. My sister clutched my arm. I remember the way the air in the room felt thicker, as if someone else was there. And then just as slowly, the door closed on its own. Handle eased back up, and it happened twice more before it finally stopped. The voice at 3 a.m. Years later, when I was 17, my parents took us on a pilgrimage. I didn't want to go, but my parents were determined, so we all went. That night, we stayed in the living room of a stranger's house, along with other travelers. I slept on the floor, my sister on my left. The day before, I'd watched The Conjuring with my friends, so, of course, my brain was already on edge. I woke up at 2:55. In the movie, everything goes wrong at 3:07, so every creak and every gust of wind in that unfamiliar house felt amplified to me. Then my sister, who sometimes talks in her sleep, she sat up abruptly. She turned toward me, eyes half open but somehow focused right at me, and in a low, deep voice that wasn't hers, she said clearly, "Are you going to let me in or not?" It wasn't her tone, it wasn't her usual sleepy mumbling. It was loud and demanding, like a stranger had borrowed her mouth. She stared at me as if waiting for an answer. After about a few seconds, she whispered something I couldn't catch and lay back down like nothing had happened. I froze. I couldn't even scream. I just whispered prayers until I eventually fell asleep. The unknown footsteps. When I was 19, I'm just kind of cramming for an exam at the end of the narrow upstairs corridor. And at the other end were the stairs, and just beside them, my sister's room. My grandmother was living on the floor below us at the time. It was around 11 p.m.-ish, and I think I had music playing softly when I noticed the light at the bottom of the stairs switch on. Not a big deal. Grandma often went to the bathroom late at night. Took off my headphones to listen. No footsteps, and the light clicked off. Then it turned on again, and this time I heard 3 slow steps on the stairs, and then silence. Whoever or whatever it was standing halfway up. The light went off, and I held my breath. Then it turned on again. But this time I heard 6 steps coming from the bottom of the stairs. as if the person had gone back down without ever making a sound going down. I knew every sound of those stairs by heart, and everyone in my family had a distinct step. This wasn't anyone I knew. I called out. There was no reply. Then there was a sudden burst of footsteps, and they were fast, rushing all the way up the stairs. There was no one there, and the light flicked off mid-run. Slammed my door and didn't move for the rest of the night. Later I told my mom, and she grabbed the holy water she kept on her bedside drawer and prayed over the staircase. Now, I'm not really religious anymore. Well, not in the way I was as a kid. But those three things, they happened. I don't have any explanations, but they kept a corner of my mind open to things I can't quite name. And we're a happy, normal family with no dark secrets or tragedies. But sometimes I wonder if some places just hold something extra. You bet. Whispers in the Quiet Room. A little backstory. Since I was around 4 years old, and throughout my childhood actually, I'd sometimes have these strange, unexplainable experiences that I never fully understood. Later, when I started living on my own in my 20s, almost every place I moved into had some kind of odd activity. Things like hearing the sounds of chairs scraping the floor in the kitchen when I was completely alone, or feeling like someone was standing just out of sight. I'd get so scared I'd run to my room, I'd lock the door and hide under the blanket like it'd keep the world out. In my late 20s, I moved into a small loft apartment, and not long after moving in, my boyfriend and I were napping one quiet afternoon. Half asleep, he mumbled, "Someone's breathing in here," and then somehow drifted right back to sleep. I was wide awake after that. I strained to my ears. I was trying to catch what he'd heard, and then I noticed it too. Slow, heavy breaths like somebody standing just a few feet from the bed. It wasn't coming from the walls, the vents, or outside. It was hanging in the air in the middle of the room. The longer I would listen, the louder it grew. It wasn't just breathing anymore, it was deliberate. One deep inhale, two short exhales. Like it knew I could hear and wanted me to know it was there. And then it began to shift, drifting from the foot of the bed toward to where we were lying. I could almost feel its presence following the sound. I remember feeling so frustrated all I wanted was a quiet, ordinary place to live. I felt like moving somewhere new just meant inviting a new kind of haunting. With my boyfriend there, I didn't feel helpless. But I lived alone, and the idea of being alone with whatever this was made my skin crawl around. The next evening, when I got home from work, I whispered to myself, "Please don't be breathing, please don't be breathing." But the second I opened the door, a long, drawn-out exhale rolled through the room. My stomach clenched. And around that same week, an old friend from my hometown, we're just gonna call him Steve, and he passed away in a motorcycle accident. A few of us drove for hours to attend his funeral, and afterward, one of his demo albums was released to his friends. We played it on the ride home, and for some reason the CD player jammed right after we put it in. We joked that Steve just wanted to keep us company a little bit longer, and I didn't mind. I can't remember if the breathing came before or after Steve's funeral. It all sort of blurred together. What I do remember is that the CD stayed stuck in my car for several days. One night, alone in the apartment, the breathing started again, steady, cold, and close. Panic flared in my chest, and out of nowhere, I thought of Steve's music. I wanted it with me in that room. Bolted down 3 flights of stairs, got into my car, and begged the CD player to let it go. "Please, I need you now," I whispered. I pressed eject. The CD popped out effortlessly. If that was just a coincidence, it was a perfect one. Walked back with that CD in hand, felt like holding a small shield. I played Eli's songs the moment I stepped inside. Warmth and familiarity filled the room, and it was like having a friend sitting beside me. And that night, something inside me shifted. I decided I wouldn't feed the fear anymore. I didn't listen for the breathing, and I didn't care, and after that, it simply stopped. Maybe it was never real, maybe it was, but it's been nearly a decade since then. I haven't felt anything dark brush past me. Still keep a quiet corner in my mind for the unknown, but honestly, I don't miss it. Whispers after the last breath. When my uncle fell seriously ill with pneumonia and COVID, the family went through weeks of restless nights and quiet fear. Machines hummed softly in his hospital room, the ventilator rising and falling as if holding on to hope for us. When the doctors gently told us there was nothing more they could do, we made the heartbreaking decision to let him go. All of us gathered in that small, cold room. We held his hands and whispered prayers. Some simply sat in silence with tears running down their faces. When the ventilator was removed, there was a stillness that felt heavier than anything I'd ever known. I'll never forget the sound of that silence. As he took his final breath, something strange happened. I felt a rush of warmth on my fingertips. It's as though an invisible hand brushed mine. It wasn't dramatic or frightening, just a quiet, weightless touch. Maybe it was my mind trying to find comfort in an unbearable moment, but it felt real. It's like his soul paused for a heartbeat just to say goodbye. A few days later, I'm standing in the kitchen making coffee. That's when I heard a sound behind me, the exact soft, rasping, throat-clearing cough he always made. It was so close, right near my left ear. I spun around expecting to see someone standing there. The house was empty. My wife was in the bathroom at the other end of the hall. When I told her what I'd heard, she thought maybe it was just stress, so I kind of did too. Till it happened again. One evening, we're both on the couch. The same cough echoed softly between us. We looked at each other without saying a word. We both knew exactly what we'd heard. And then came the other things. My wife told me she sometimes felt the blanket at night tightening, as if being gently pulled from the other side. I'd felt the bed shift too, like somebody sitting down next to me. A faint dip in the mattress, a pressure on my leg. Not harsh, not threatening, just present. The strangest part is I don't feel scared. When I sense him near, there's this odd mix of comfort and unease. I drop things more, I knock over cups, and my movements get clumsy. Maybe it's just my nerves. Maybe it's him trying to be noticed. We both heard the cough several more times together and alone. It's like a reminder that love doesn't always disappear with the last breath. I don't know what exactly is happening. Maybe it's just our hearts refusing to let go. Maybe he never really left. A whisper in the wind. During my senior year of high school, I got the opportunity to visit Washington, D.C. for the very first time. It was January 2009. The city was buzzing with energy. We were going to witness Obama's first inauguration, and at 17, this was my first trip without my parents. I was both thrilled and quietly anxious. A whole week in D.C. and New York felt like the biggest adventure of my teenage years. We flew out on the 18th, and the inauguration was on the 20th. And on the 21st, we visited Arlington National Cemetery. The morning was cold but clear. The sun rose slowly, coloring everything gold. As my friends wandered between rows of silent white headstones, I pulled out my phone and texted my mom. "Do we have anyone here?" A minute later, she replied, "No, sweetheart, but it must be breathtaking." I smiled at her words, slipping my phone back into my coat. I didn't think much about it then, just kept walking and breathing in the quiet. Fast forward to the day we returned. We left New York in the afternoon, changed planes in Chicago at dinner, finally landed in Minneapolis around 9 p.m. I'd been exhausted from the night before. We'd gone to see a Broadway show and stayed up way too late laughing in the hotel. And on the last leg of the flight, curled up by the window and fell asleep almost instantly. When the plane touched down, I carefully checked my seat and under it and the pockets and the floor, convinced I might have forgotten something. Everything was there: passport, carry-on, jacket, wallet. Still, as I walked down the jet bridge, a strange heaviness was sitting in my chest. Felt like I'd left something behind. I just couldn't name what it was. Back at school, Mom was waiting in the car, and when we got home, I walked in to find the living room covered in poster boards, photographs of my dad's father at different ages, black and white portraits to warm, faded family snapshots. "What's all this for?" I asked. She took a shaky breath. Grandpa passed away early morning on the 21st. Everything slowed down. We hugged tightly, and the quiet house filled with our sobs. Then in a flash, I remembered that hollow feeling as I stepped off the plane. I told her about it. She wiped her eyes and whispered, "Maybe he was trying to say goodbye." And I believe her, I really do. The shadow at the doorway. As I remember, this happened when I was maybe 5. I know I wasn't very tall, because the top of my parents' dresser was just about level with my eyes, and that little detail matters in a minute. My room was a small corner space. It's connected to my parents' bedroom by a sliding door. And one night I woke up feeling uneasy, like something had pulled me out of sleep. I had a bad dream. Slid the door open, tiptoed into the dark room where my parents were asleep. I whispered if I could sleep with them, and my mom, still half asleep, murmured something like, "Come here." And on the opposite wall was a narrow door that led to the hallway. And just as I started to climb into the bed, that door creaked open by itself. A tall, shadowy shape stood in the doorway. Couldn't make out its face, or even if it had one. The figure was about as tall as the door frame, completely black, like it was cut out of the dark. What I remember most clearly isn't how it looked, but the way the air changed. The room suddenly felt like it was suffocating and heavy. It's as if something awful had been let in. In fact, the air itself seemed to hum with something wrong. It was on one side of the bed, then it was on the other, and slowly it started to glide. Not walk. It glided along the foot of the bed toward me. The moment it moved, I realized I couldn't move. My chest locked up, my legs wouldn't work. My throat made these broken sounds instead of screams. I could see my parents' outlines right next to me, completely still. They didn't stir, didn't even breathe differently. It was like they were frozen, or like I was somewhere else entirely. That was the worst part. The absolute certainty that no one could help me. The shadow reached the foot of the bed, came closer. Its shape flickered slightly, like smoke trying to hold itself together. It stopped just a couple of feet away from me, and for a second I thought it would touch me. And then without a sound, it folded in on itself and vanished like the darkness had swallowed it. The instant it disappeared, everything snapped back, and my body jerked free. My voice returned. I scrambled onto the bed between my parents. I don't know what that was, and I've had nightmares before, but this was not the same. This thing felt real. It felt like it knew I could see it. The next morning, I told my parents. My mom just told me it was probably a dream, but my dad looked at me differently. He told me quietly that he'd once woken up as a child and seen something standing at the foot of his bed too. He never forgot it. He couldn't blame me. Grateful I never saw that shadow again, but to this day, Whenever a door opens at night, my heart remembers. Whispers in the Dark. September 2022. I was awake with my daughter in the nursery at around 2 a.m. It's when I hear a sound drifting up from the living room. It's faint at first, like somebody moving around, and then unmistakably the sound of a drawer sliding open. Then the sharp clink of metal on wood. And then it's like a steady rhythm, a knife on a cutting board maybe. My parents are visiting for a few weeks to help with the baby, and since the guest room's downstairs, I assume it's my dad making tea or raiding the fridge. But then the air in the room shifts, you know, that feeling you get in the back of your neck. It's when your instinct screams something isn't right. That happened. I step toward the nursery doorway. And the instant my foot touches the hall carpet, the noise stops. Dead quiet. Peek around the corner into the kitchen. Nothing, no one. The drawer, I swear I heard, isn't even open. And then a worse thought hit me. What if whatever that was trying to draw me away from her? I spin back, check the crib, and she's fast asleep. Heart's pounding so hard it hurts now. I pull up the camera feed and bolt the hallway and nursery cams are off. We never turn them off. Can't explain it, but I know I wasn't imagining the sound. Still sitting here with my daughter now with the lights on. Every creak of the house making me flinch. February 2023. Things quieted down for months. I almost convinced myself it was just exhaustion messing with me. But lately, strange little things have started happening again. It began with her toys. I'd walk into the nursery in the morning, find her favorite stuffed rabbit on the floor, or her sound machine unplugged. At first, I thought I was being careless. Then I saw something. Standing beside her crib and rocking her gently. That's when the baby monitor slid off the shelf, not dropped, but slid. It crashed almost a meter away. There was no breeze or vibration, just a deliberate push from something unseen. And tonight, watching the monitor, I saw the big box of formula. It's got heavy tins inside. It fell out of the closet. It didn't tip, it fell. Whatever I felt last summer, it's back, and it's in her room. April 2023. This event was terrifying. Feeding my daughter when she suddenly started choking. My wife ran for the deep choker while I pulled her from the high chair and gave back thrusts. It felt like hours before she finally coughed it out, gasping and crying in my arms. And just as everything went still again, a sound echoed through the house. A child's laughter, soft and clear and close. I froze and my wife met my eyes, both of us whispering at the exact same time. What the hell was that? She doesn't know about the other things I've been noticing. I've kept it to myself. But now it's not just me. Whatever this is, I don't think it hurt her, but I swear it enjoyed it. The phone that wouldn't die. The house I bought was in a quiet corner of northern Minnesota, winter of 2015, and it had a secret. It wasn't obvious at first. To me, it was simply the first house I'd ever owned. 30 acres of woods and field, and a little white farmhouse tucked between old pines. 30 acres. The price was surprisingly good, which I later learned was because the owner was selling the place after her sister passed away there. She had lived alone for decades, and she's known around the small town as the Garden Lady. Her house had been carefully arranged like a museum. Rows of flowers around the porch and trellises in the backyard. A neat little stone path leading to a fountain that she'd built by hand. Even the plumbing diagram for the fountain had been sketched in tape inside a kitchen drawer. The house wasn't exactly my taste, but it felt gentle and quiet. things only started to feel off after I began changing things. My husband and I tore up the heavy orange carpet and we put a wood floor down, painted the walls a pale gray, and we pulled down the ivy-covered trellises and cleared some of the tangled garden to make space for a small deck. The fountain in the backyard was the last to go. It had cracked during the first thaw, and we decided not to fix it. The night after we dismantled it, the phone started ringing, which by itself wouldn't have been strange, except the phone was disconnected. It was a transparent old landline from the late 80s. It was sitting on a dusty end table on the enclosed porch. When I moved in, the internet company had to dig a new line to the house. There had been no active service at all. At first, we ignored it, but it rang again a week later. When I finally picked it up, there was a long, hollow pause, and then a low, flat voice that said my husband's full name, including his previous address from years ago. Then the line went dead. The next incident happened on a windy afternoon when I was home alone. The phone started ringing again. It rang over and over, and I let it ring. I was determined to ignore it. And just as it went silent, I heard a sharp crack upstairs, like something splitting apart. So I ran up and I saw the large frame photograph of our bed, and it was lying on the floor. The glass was shattered clean across the room, the nail and hook still firmly in the wall. After that, my husband tossed the phone into the old metal burn barrel out back. And that same night, lying in bed, we heard the ringtone again, clear as day, coming from the porch. What followed for the next year was a slow unraveling. One pipe burst without warning in the middle of a warm week, flooding half the kitchen. Mice appeared in impossible numbers inside drawers and walls and even the attic. We trapped dozens, but they always came back. Power flickered constantly, and sometimes for hours with no storms or wind to explain it. And eventually we gave up. She doesn't want us here. We sold the house and packed everything into a truck without looking back. We live in a new home now across the state. It's brighter and warmer. And before we painted a single wall, I went through the house and made sure there wasn't a single landline left, just in case. The Shadow on the Road. My junior year of high school, I went to a friend's birthday party, where somebody eventually brought out a Ouija board. Oh boy. Back then, I was really into anything paranormal, but I had no idea just how dangerous those things could be. So we started with the usual questions. Is anyone here, and what's your name? We laughed at the slow, shaky movements of the planchette. But then something changed. It got darker in the room. Not like the lights went out, but like the air itself dimmed. When someone asked how old it would be when we died, everybody got numbers like 80 or 90, except me. The planchette just went back and forth, 0101, over and over. One of the guys finally said, "This is stupid," knocked the piece off the board. Tried to laugh it off, but I didn't play again after that. Something about it sat deep in my chest like a stone. Not long after, maybe 2 weeks later, he appeared to me, and I didn't know who he was, just that he was there. At first, he felt calm and safe, almost like a protector standing in the corner of my classroom. But that comfort, it turned into fear quickly. At home, things began to happen. Drawers sliding open, quiet whispers when no one else was there, lights flickering in rooms we weren't in. And at night it was worse. He'd stand right outside my door, and I could feel the dread pouring off of him. His shape twisted like smoke into something darker. And I knew he wasn't just some lost soul, he was malicious. I lived like this for years until I met the man who's now my husband. Congratulations. Our first place together was a tiny duplex, barely, maybe 450, 500 square feet. And from the couch you could see everything, the bedroom, the kitchen, even the back door. It should have felt cozy, and instead footsteps and whispers filled the walls. My husband, who was a practicing Wiccan at the time, blessed the house. But he missed the outer walls and the porch. And that's where the knocks started, and the scratching, the heavy, slow knocks on the windows at night. People who visited said they saw the shadow too, always tall and broad-shouldered and heavy. They'd say things like, "I don't know what that is, but it's bad." And without fail, it would follow me back into whatever room I was in. My husband tried to banish it once. Didn't work. He worked late, closing shifts, getting home around 3 a.m. most. To get home, he'd have to drive down a winding road near the river, a place already known for strange accidents. But one night he stumbled inside pale and shaking, and it took him a week to tell me what happened. Halfway down that road, his brakes stopped working. The steering wheel jerked out of his hands, pulling him straight toward the river at 60 miles an hour. He fought with everything he had to keep that car straight. The next day, the brakes worked fine, and so did the steering. And that was it for me. If evil existed, then so did good, and I started going with him to the church that my parents attended. One night I prayed and told whatever had followed me for years that it wasn't welcome anymore. I claimed my home, and after that the house was quiet. And for the first time in a while I slept without listening for footsteps. We've since moved out of that state, and our new home is calm and safe. The only spirit that ever comes around now is our dog. His name's Solo. Lost him last year. And his visits feel warm. From everything I've lived through, I'll say this much. Don't mess with Ouija boards. It might not seem like much at the time, but what followed me nearly cost someone I loved their life. You heard him. The night Andre came back. At 19, I worked the front counter at a cozy pizza place called Ciro's. My job was simple. Run the register, pour drinks maybe, and beer and wine mostly. Help close up at the end of the night. Wine at a pizza place. Usually, 2 people would be in the back washing trays and shutting down the ovens. I cleaned the lobby up front. And that night was quiet. I was sweeping the floor near the entrance when I turned toward the register. There's a little open space behind the counter and leads straight to the kitchen, and that's when I saw him. A young man stood there. He seemed translucent, like a thin layer of fog wrapped around him. He wore jean shorts and a red Ciro's t-shirt, just like the rest of us. He looked like maybe a light-skinned black teenager with a soft afro, maybe 17 or 18. I froze and I blinked and I glanced toward the big front windows and then looked back and he was just gone. I didn't feel fear exactly. Instead, it was like this soft, strange wash of emotions. Peace and sadness and confusion. Felt like he was just as surprised to see me as I was to see him. For that split second, we made eye contact. Later, as we were locking up, I asked my supervisor if anybody had ever died while working here. His face shifted from tired to startled. "Yeah," he said. "A young man named Andre." 10 years later, hanging out with one of my best friends. Or my best friend's best friends. Ghost stories come up, and I told mine casually, not expecting much. But when I finished, she went pale. "I knew him," she whispered. "Andre. We were close in high school. He still visits one of his friends in one of my dreams. He was working at Ciro's when he died." Then it hit me. I'd seen his face before. Not that night at the restaurant. Years earlier at school. Mutual friends. He died young in a strange and tragic accident. They said it was the choking game. He'd been found at He'd been found at a park by a jogger early one morning, and the official report called it an accident, and some of his friends whispered otherwise. I never saw him again. I almost never talk about this. It's been nearly 20 years, and it sounds unreal when I say it out loud, but people's questions made me remember more than I had in years. Back then, Ciro's had huge glass windows. It was dark outside, and the lights inside were bright, so everything seemed to reflect like a mirror. And when I saw Andre, it wasn't a reflection, it was solid and three-dimensional. And out of instinct, I turned my gaze away toward the opposite side, saw only my reflection in the glass, no second figure. That's when I turned back and he was gone. I stood there rooted to the floor trying to process it. I remember his face vividly, soft features, clear eyes, an expression like somebody caught between two worlds. I walked straight to the back and said, "Hey," I asked my supervisor, "did anybody who here that was working die?" He stared at me like I pulled the question out of nowhere and said, "Yeah, his name was Andre, why?" I pointed back toward the lobby because I just saw him. I'm a little bit confused. The moment he said Andre's name, the puzzle pieces clicked, and I remembered the memorial and the obituary and my friends crying. I remembered his face in pictures, and that was exactly who had stood there seconds earlier, and we fell silent. Never brought it up again. Years later, somebody kind of close to him told me they believed it wasn't an accident, that he might have been murdered, though nobody ever proved it. But that night, what I felt from him wasn't darkness, it wasn't rage, it was something soft and gentle, like someone lingering in a place that once mattered. I never saw him again. Never forgotten the look in his eyes, though. Wait a minute, the next story. Well, let's just continue reading then. Still a little bit confused. Sorry about the coughing. The night Andre came back. I'm just pre-skimming this. It truly is the exact same story again. Please fast forward one more story after this one if you could. The night Andre came back. At 19, I worked the front counter at a cozy pizza place called Ciro's. My job was simple. Run the register, pour drinks maybe, beer and wine mostly. Help close up at the end of the night. Wine at a pizza place. Usually, 2 people would be in the back washing trays and shutting down the ovens. I cleaned the lobby up front. And that night was quiet. I was sweeping the floor near the entrance when I turned toward the register. There's a little open space behind the counter and leads straight to the kitchen, and that's when I saw him. A young man stood there. He seemed translucent, like a thin layer of fog wrapped around him. He wore jean shorts and a red Ciro's t-shirt, just like the rest of us. He looked like maybe a light-skinned black teenager with a soft afro, maybe 17 or 18. I froze and I blinked and I glanced toward the big front windows and then looked back and he was just gone. I didn't feel fear exactly. Instead, it was like this soft, strange wash of emotions. Peace and sadness and confusion. Felt like he was just as surprised to see me as I was to see him. For that split second, we made eye contact. Later, as we were locking up, I asked my supervisor if anybody had ever died while working here. His face shifted from tired to startled. "Yeah," he said. "A young man named Andre." 10 years later, hanging out with one of my best friends. Or my best friend's best friends. Ghost stories come up, and I told mine casually, not expecting much. But when I finished, she went pale. "I knew him," she whispered. "Andre. We were close in high school. He still visits one of his friends in one of my dreams. He was working at Ciro's when he died. Then it hit me. I'd seen his face before. Not that night at the restaurant. Years earlier at school. Mutual friends. He died young in a strange and tragic accident. They said it was the choking game. He'd been found at He'd been found at a park by a jogger early one morning, and the official report called it an accident, and some of his friends whispered otherwise. I never saw him again. I almost never talk about this. It's been nearly 20 years, and it sounds unreal when I say it out loud, but people's questions made me remember more than I had in years. Back then, Ciro's had huge glass windows. It was dark outside, and the lights inside were bright, so everything seemed to reflect like a mirror. And when I saw Andre, it wasn't a reflection, it was solid and three-dimensional. And out of instinct, I turned my gaze away toward the opposite side. Saw only my reflection in the glass. No second figure. That's when I turned back and he was gone. I stood there rooted to the floor trying to process it. I remember his face vividly, soft features, clear eyes, an expression like somebody caught between two worlds. I walked straight to the back and said, "Hey," I asked my supervisor, "did anybody here that was working die?" He stared at me like I pulled the question out of nowhere and said, "Yeah, his name was Andre, why?" I pointed back toward the lobby because I just saw him. I'm a little bit confused. The moment he said Andre's name, the puzzle pieces clicked, and I remembered the memorial and the obituary and my friends crying. I remembered his face in pictures, and that was exactly who had stood there seconds earlier, and we fell silent. Never brought it up again. Years later, somebody kind of close to him told me they believed it wasn't an accident, that he might have been murdered, though nobody ever proved it. But that night, what I felt from him wasn't darkness, it wasn't rage, it was something soft and gentle, like someone lingering in a place that once mattered. I never saw him again. Never forgotten the look in his eyes, though. Wait a minute, the next story. Well, let's just continue reading then. Still a little bit confused. Sorry about the coughing. A quiet house that wasn't so quiet. Different story this time. Oh yeah. First off, I wouldn't call myself a religious person, nor am I the type to jump at any sort of strange sound and call it paranormal. I'd say I lean more toward agnostic. I think a lot of things could be real, but I've yet to see anything I can't rationalize, at least most of the time. But since moving out here to this quiet patch of land in East Texas about 4 years ago, things haven't exactly been easy to explain away. About 3 years back, my girlfriend was pregnant. We started noticing odd things and knocking, and not on the front door, but around the side of the house, like small hands tapping, then light footsteps, like a child running. We both blamed the wind or maybe raccoons at first, and it went on for months. No pattern, no clear source, just there. After our baby was born, about 3 months in, another thing started. A single bedroom light, always the same one, it would turn on in the middle of the night. I chalked it up to the old wiring. The house is more than a century old after all, but it did nag at me. Then came the dreams. Or maybe not just dreams, I'd be half asleep and half aware. I'd feel this cold weight in the room, like a shadow just beyond my vision. My body would lock up, shaking like a sort of seizure. Never had one in my life. And then it'd vanish the second I forced myself awake. My girlfriend changed too. Forgetful, lost in her own head. I assumed postpartum at first, tried to be patient. But meanwhile, the baby's toys would light up in the dead of night without anyone near them. Again, I told myself it was wiring or batteries. Always an explanation. 2 years pass. Nothing, just normal life. Then one afternoon, as I sat on the couch, A stack of old DVDs on the mantel. It lifted and slid across the room like somebody had thrown it. I watched it happen. No sleep deprivation, no stress, just me and the sound of plastic hitting wood. A year after that, she told me sometimes she saw a shape in the hallway, a shadow. She'd think it was me until she realized I wasn't even home. We laughed about it at first, and then one night a door closed in front of us. Not slammed, just eased shut. No draft, no loose hinges. A scrub brush flew from the counter like somebody flicked it. And yes, that same light, the one from years before, flicked on by itself right after. None of it is enough to make me claim haunted house or anything dramatic like that, but when you're standing in a quiet room watching something move without a hand near it, explanations start to feel a little thin. And I'm still the kind of person who likes to rule out the logical first, but sometimes logic steps aside and leaves me with questions that don't have easy answers. Whispers by the river bend. There's this quiet little park just a few streets away from the new apartment I moved into. I've known this place since I was a kid. Lately, I've been going almost every evening. It's like it's calling me back there. There's a small river that winds through the park where a man reportedly disappeared years ago. I never once felt alone when I walked past it. Sometimes it felt like someone or something was waiting for me. I've always been sensitive to the supernatural and supernormal. Emotions that aren't mine can flood through me like a storm. Growing up in a house that carried a dark, oppressive presence taught me to trust those feelings, even when I didn't really want to. That day, I really wasn't feeling well at all. I told myself I'd stay home. Maybe I'd read or maybe I'd sleep. But this pull, soft but firm, kept urging me out. Against my better judgment, I went. Usually, I stick to the main path, but this time my feet took me somewhere else entirely. I drifted past the usual benches and past the old swings, heading straight to a narrow dirt trail that had been cleared in years. I wasn't in control, I was being led. There's this gnarled oak tree leaning over a bend in the river. I felt its presence ever since I was little. Standing beneath it that evening, my mind felt foggy, as if I'd stepped into a dream I couldn't wake from. I followed the overgrown path down to a secluded patch by the water. And then it happened, an intrusive thought, sharp as a knife, slid into my mind. This is where I'd hide a body. The words weren't mine. My breath hitched and panic squeezed my chest tightly. I was frozen and I was unable to move or even think. My heart roared in my ears, and for a moment I thought I might collapse right there. Then I saw something pale and half buried in the damp soil near the roots of the oak. At first, I thought it was a piece of driftwood, but when I nudged it with my shoe, I saw the curve of bone. Clean, white, unmistakable. A fragment of a skull. Human. I didn't touch it. I couldn't. I stared at it while my hands trembled. The sound of the river rushing around me. And later, after some frantic calls and showing the photos to my cousin's wife, whose father is a doctor, it became undeniable. It was not an animal bone. I called the police and they arrived quickly, marking the area and asking questions I could barely answer through my lightheadedness. I kept feeling like the air was too thin, like someone else's panic was bleeding into me. While watching them work, a memory struck me hard. When I was a child, I used to have a recurring dream of standing on a riverbank, staring down at a skull resting in the mud. I'd wake up breathless and terrified. Never understood why, until now. The energy I felt by that river was the same presence that had always lingered near the water, the same whisper that pulled me there. I don't know if I'll ever learn whose remains they are, but I do know this. Someone lost and afraid wanted to be found. Happened to be the one who had heard. still visit that riverbend often. Never feel truly alone there. Sometimes a shadow lingers by the oak, not threatening, but waiting. When I turn to leave, it always seems to say, "Stay." When I finally gathered the courage to whisper, "Why me?" the answer came soft and clear. You were the only one who listened. The man in the corner. You have no reason to trust what I'm saying. I'm just another random person on Reddit after all. Duly noted. But I know ghosts are real, and even though I've never actually seen one with my own eyes, too. My parents bought their house in 1984. That's when I was still little. It's a solid old place. 4 bedrooms, red brick, built in 1919. It has a big yard full of oak trees, and I didn't learn about this until years later, but just a few days after we moved in, my dad had his first encounter. My dad's the last person who'd believe in anything supernatural. He's practical to the core. But one night while walking from the kitchen toward the staircase, he glanced toward the living room and saw an elderly man sitting calmly in the armchair tucked into the corner. He blinked, he looked again, and the man was gone. Not long after, Dad ran into the granddaughter of the original owner. She still lived nearby and ran a tiny grocery stand down the street. When Dad told her about the old man, she disappeared into the back of the shop, returned with a faded black and white photograph. The man in the picture, every detail from the bow tie to the suit, exact same figure Dad had seen in that corner. It left him completely rattled. He never could explain it logically, and over the time he just sort of started referring to it as the ghost. When we looked deeper into the house's history, we learned that the man hadn't died there, but had lived in the house for decades. And for its time, the house was considered fancy. While everything else nearby had made of wood, ours was brick, and we found old records showing 2 funerals had taken place in the house. The family's teenage son, a brakeman for the railroad, he'd been crushed in an accident, and their daughter died young after drinking carbolic acid. Whoa. Both funerals were held right at the parlor, and it was a house soaked in memory and grief. When I was about 14, I used to record songs off the radio with my old tape deck. And one day, when I was playing this tape back, there was a man's voice. It was raspy and elderly and so clear, saying, "I believe the booger man has a hold of you." It was right in the middle of the track, and I hadn't heard a thing while recording. Booger man. My mom had our pastor come bless the house after that. And I was a stubborn teen back then. Probably an easy target for whatever energy was lingering. Still wish I had that tape. The voice, the rough rural twang, burned into my memory. Had that backwoods old America eeriness. There were other things too, like the thermostat cranked up to max in the middle of summer, or the TV flicking on and off by itself. Small disturbances that never quite made sense. And then a few years ago, something happened that still chills me. My dad saw me walk through the door and glanced at him without a word and head straight to the kitchen. Only it wasn't me. Showed up 5 minutes later, said hello as usual, and his face went pale. He swore on everything that he saw me. Well, I can't explain any of it. Honestly, neither can he. But my dad isn't the kind of man to invent stories or exaggerate them. That's why I believe. Not because I've seen ghosts with my own eyes, but because I trust his. Because whatever is in that house doesn't seem to belong fully to this world. Maybe they're just existing on a different frequency, close enough for us to catch a glimpse once in a while. The thing in the hallway. As a kid, I had a few strange encounters I've never really talked about. The most vivid one involved something or someone looked eerily like a childhood friend of mine. She had long black hair and fell in uneven strands, pale skin, pitch black eyes. It was like looking at a twisted version of someone I used to play with after school. The first time I saw her, my dad's driving me home from soccer practice. I caught a glimpse of her standing motionless on the sidewalk in the rearview mirror. About 50 yards away, watching the car fade, I blinked and she was gone. The second time, years later, I opened my bedroom door to grab a sweater or something, and I saw her kneeling on the far side of my bed. She didn't move, she didn't breathe. I just quietly closed the door and waited in the hallway until the sun rose. I didn't think too hard about it back then. Kids see weird stuff, right? But years later, something happened that made me wonder if these moments were connected. It's about 3 years ago now, just before dawn. I'm living with my girlfriend at the time. Both of us are keeping weird late-night hours. We were getting ready to crash, and I decided to get some cereal. She trailed behind me sleepily. "What are you even doing?" she asked, rubbing her eyes. Before I could even answer, she froze, staring down the hallway. "What the hell?" she whispered. Then she flipped the hallway light switch on. The second the light flicked on, the bulb burst with a sharp pop. And for the briefest second, the flash revealed a figure. She was tall, way too tall, and her head nearly brushed the ceiling, and her limbs were impossibly thin, like a shadow stretched by something unnatural. Her hair hung forward, and I swear she didn't have a face, just darkness. And then she was gone, leaving behind the smell of burnt dust and broken glass. My girlfriend later said she'd seen a pale mist forming sort of beside her before she turned on the light. And that was why she reacted. That was why she screamed. For the next 2 years we were together, and the house was never quiet. We'd hear soft knocks at the windows at 2 a.m. and murmuring outside the bedroom door when no one else was home. Bedroom light switching on by itself right after we mentioned turning it on. And once something slammed its weight on the floor behind me, like somebody sprinting. But when I turned, the hallway was empty. Objects would vanish only to show up later in bizarre places, like inside the freezer. And her dog, normally calm, would stand rigid, staring down the hallway with his hair bristling and growling at nothing. Oddly, it was always worse for her. She even once told me she woke up and saw someone lying right beside her, facing her. When I asked, she said the figure didn't breathe and it didn't blink, it just stared at her. And the strangest part is, everything stopped after we broke up. No more whispers or shadows and no tall woman in the hallway. It's been over a year and it's quiet again. Well, that's at least good for you. Don't know how that went or if it was good or bad, but no more of that sounds pretty relieving. The church basement. Before I begin, I should give you a little bit of context. Context about myself and the town I grew up in and the church that shaped a big part of my childhood. I come from a tiny town in northern Minnesota. It's where everybody knows everybody. They might not know your favorite flavor of pie, but still everybody knows everybody enough. And it's pretty much my reality. My family has belonged to the same Lutheran church for generations now. And ever since the building itself was sort of hauled up from the countryside into town in the 40s, I grew up exploring every hallway and every creaky step and every echo in that place. I know its smells and its quirks and its sounds by heart. I know bits and pieces of its history, but not enough to answer the questions that's haunted me ever since. Who or what still lingers there? It all really began in 2012. Our pastor decided to take some time off to recover from burnout and depression. And around that time, I started helping with the weekly church bulletins, typing them up and printing and folding and delivering them to both our church and the sister church outside town. My dad, my brother, and my sister usually pitched in, and since we're chronic procrastinators, this always happened late on Saturday nights when the church was otherwise empty. One night while we're driving over to finish the bulletins, Dad and my brother started talking about something weird that had happened to them a couple of weeks earlier. Dad's a deacon, had taken my brother with him to set up communion late one Saturday. And back then, before somebody finally tossed it in 2010, the church had this old rotary phone mounted in the basement wall by the kitchen door. And if you remember those, you remember the sharp brrring sound that they made. I tried. Snuck up on me. They were near the tables in the basement fellowship hall, and that's when they heard it clear as day, the rotary phone ringing from the wall where it used to hang. Except the phone had been gone for years, and Dad didn't answer, of course. Who would call a church that late? And besides, the new phone didn't sound anything like that. A week later, the two of them were down in the basement again. That's when they heard slow, deliberate footsteps pacing the aisle of the chapel directly above their heads. Back and forth, no hesitation, no creak of a door opening, no greeting from someone arriving late, just that steady rhythm of someone walking who wasn't supposed to be there. A few weeks after that, I experienced it myself. So we're finishing the bulletins and laughing a little nervously about the ghost story Dad and my brother had told us. That's when the footsteps returned, and this time they were coming from the staircase that leads down from the altar to the kitchen. It's just across the basement from where we sat. We couldn't see the stairs, but the sound was impossible to mistake. Step after step, up and down with no pause. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my ears, and Dad had just found an old photo album underneath the printer desk, and my siblings and I were whispering, practically begging him to just leave it and to get out of there. I always thought that if something like this ever happened to me, I'd be brave and grab a flashlight and check it out like people do in movies. Turns out I was wrong. I couldn't move, I couldn't even make myself breathe normally. First time I'd ever truly felt that kind of fear, to be honest. Later, my old math teacher, who also attended the church and had a kind of no-nonsense logical personality, told my dad that she'd heard the same kind of footsteps one night herself. She was practicing piano by the altar, right in the front of those same stairs. She'd thought it was just kids messing around and called out for them to knock it off. But the footsteps didn't stop until she walked toward the staircase, and when she looked, there was no one, there was nothing. At first, I thought maybe what we're dealing with was some kind of residual haunting, like in those old paranormal shows, like a replay of something that once happened. But over time, I really wasn't so sure. Sounds didn't always come from the same place. They moved and they shifted and they felt aware. And now, whatever, I've had to step foot in that church, or rather, whenever, I find myself listening for those footsteps, tensing at the smallest creak. I don't think whatever is there is malicious. It just feels lost and stuck between places. And since the basement was added after the building was moved into town, I can't help but wonder if whoever or whatever, maybe it came along afterwards. The whisper behind the door. Hi again. Made my first post about a week and a half ago about the time slip in Atlanta. Wanted to share another story from Nashville, though. Quick rundown on it. I'm an artist from Charlotte, North Carolina, and I was commissioned to do a mural project on a ceiling in Nashville, Tennessee. This happened during the third week of March 2021. My younger brother tagged along to help me. He was trying to help me settle in for the first week at least. Spent most of his time reading while I was painting. We arrived on March 17th. First thing, we dropped off the ladders and supplies at the site. And after that, we stopped by a small local grocery store before checking into an extended stay hotel somewhere near downtown. Pretty sure it was just a short walk from the riverfront. Once we unloaded our bags, my brother brought up visiting a small cemetery where one of his favorite old school country singers was buried. We were tired after 6 hours on the road, so a quiet walk sounded perfect. I brought my camera, mostly out of habit. I like snapping random shots. And sometimes I get lucky with something eerie, but other than a few photos of famous graves, I took one picture of a tombstone that caught my attention. Had the same last name as my wife. Didn't mean much at the time, just felt oddly familiar. Back at the hotel, the first strange thing happened. The lamp by the bed was on. I was sure it hadn't been when we left. 2 days later, we came back from lunch and found the closet door in the hallway where the water heater was wide open. We figured maintenance might have stopped by. Our stuff wasn't touched, so we shrugged it off. But the real weirdness happened the next night. Went out for dinner after work and came back, went to sleep. Woke up to chaos. Toilet paper was shredded and strewn across the room. Closet doors were wide open. My clothes were scattered. A chair had been dragged a few feet from where it was, and an old thermostat cover nobody had ever seen before. Well, a thermostat cover I'd never seen before, sitting right next to my brother's pillow. The strangest thing of all was a puddle of clear, oily liquid under the chair. It had no smell, but left a residue I couldn't fully clean up. Called the front desk immediately. Staff checked the digital lock system, said nobody had entered since we did. And their best guess was sleepwalking. Neither of us had ever sleepwalked, and that liquid wasn't anything normal. We were genuinely shaken, and ghosts suddenly didn't feel like just a Halloween story anymore. So my brother left for Raleigh 2 days later. I stayed behind to finish the job, and that's when the activity kicked up again. One afternoon, eating lunch, watching TV. A decorative globe on the side table slowly turned about half a rotation. No one else was in the room, mind you. Then the following evening, as I was about to step into the bathroom, the door gently but firmly closed right in my face, and I froze and my stomach dropped. I called my brother. I asked if maybe I'd taken something from the cemetery, or maybe he did. Laughed and said no at first, but then I remembered the photos. I hadn't taken anything physical, but maybe the photos were enough to upset whatever was there. That night, I deleted every picture I'd taken, removed the post I'd made on Instagram, sat down and spoke out loud, apologizing to the spiriting. Whether or not anybody believes this, after that, everything stopped. No more movement, no more sounds, nothing. And a little side note. When I got home, I mentioned the name I saw on the tombstone to my mother-in-law. Her face went pale. Turns out it was a distant relative of hers. Always, always show respect to both the living and the dead. Everybody deserves peace. I second what that guy said. Or gal, I forget the gender. Whatever. It's a good line. Whispers in the Dark. Tales from the Ghost Tour. I used to work as a tour guide. It was a small, bustling tourist town in Tennessee. My job back then was to lead people on a winding walk about 2 miles around the town, sharing with them the ghost stories of its former residents. And during the summer, we'd always just kind of go before sundown. By the time we returned, the sky was deep black. A tour could take anywhere from 1 to 2 hours, depending on how fast the group walked. Just a little background. Most of the stories we're told weren't actually real. They were either glorified legends, twisting facts, or bloody crime stories with a paranormal, ghostly ending slapped on for good measure. I didn't write the script, so don't shoot the messenger. In fact, I even took time to visit a local historical center and dig up some genuine ghost tales to sprinkle into the mix, just to make the tour feel less like a cheap carnival act. But every now and then I had moments that I couldn't just laugh off as folklore, moments that made me rethink whether some stories were as fake as I thought they were. The first one I'm going to mention is the silent grave. We carried EMF detectors with us, those little devices with colored lights that react to electromagnetic fields. They usually flare up near power sources, but if one lights up in a place with no wires, you pay attention. Our model had 5 lights, red for no signal and climbing up through yellow to green when something strong was picked up. Never went really below red unless the device was switched off, though. The final stop on the tour was always an old cemetery at the edge of town. Nobody had been buried there for over a century at least. And after I wrapped up the last story, guests were free to roam the graveyard with their flashlights, snapping pictures and spooking themselves. One night, a woman called me over. "It's doing something weird," she said. I came closer. Her EMF detector wasn't lighting up, it was shutting off completely every time she was passing over a specific grave. When she lifted it away, it flicked back on. Over the grave, a total blackout. We tried a few other graves. Nothing, just that one. Stone was so worn it was barely legible. We squinted and tilted our flashlights, and finally somebody made out the first name, and it was Samuel. The last name was just a blur of weathered lines. 5 of us leaning close, trying to make it out. And then, clear as day from behind us, Holloway. We spun around, no one was there, and the night was still. I wrapped the tour up fast after that. Later that week, I came back alone and left a few flowers on that grave. Felt like the right thing to do. Story 2, The Old Man and the Silver Coin. Sometimes I'd get tips if the tour went well. Older guys loved the old covert handshake, palming me the cash like we're some sort of spy exchange. It was silly, but money's money. And I think that's adorable. One group I had was a family. It was a mom, a dad, a teenage son, and an older man who'd been sort of tacked on because we didn't run solo tours. He hardly spoke, but when he did, it was always unsettling. At one point, after I told a story about a girl who jumped from a bridge, he asked dead seriously whether I thought she died on impact or bled out slowly. Not exactly tourist banter. At the end of the tour, the family went exploring among the gravestones. The old man came up to shake my hand, and his palm was freezing cold and colder than any Tennessee night I'd ever known. When he pulled away, I felt something heavy in my hand. Not a bill, but a coin. I turned to watch him walk off down the path, except he wasn't there. He was just gone now. And the path out of the graveyard was clear for hundreds of feet. I should have seen him. In fact, I didn't even hear footsteps. So at home, I examined this coin. It was an old silver dollar, minted in a year that predated any living person who could have casually carried it around. Family later mentioned that the old man had greeted their son by name when they arrived. Or greeted their son by name, and they'd never met him before. Well, that's a good tip. Story 3, The Woman in the Cabin. An early stop on the tour was a cabin, one of the first homes ever built in the town. It had been relocated a few times, but was finally set back on its original foundation. We don't have any photographs of the woman who helped settle the town, but we do have old portraits of her daughter. Looked just like her. And that picture sat on a sign right outside the cabin. I'm sure they wouldn't agree about that. The cabin is always locked. The windows are filthy. And most nights, the inside looks like nothing more than shadows and cobwebs. But I like to let guests peek in through the cracks. It built atmosphere. One night, after telling the usual story about her spirit supposedly still lingering there, a teenage boy turned to me and said, "Who's in there?" I had laughed, assuming he was talking about the sign. "That's just an old photo," I said. He shook his head and said, "No, the lady in the chair." I leaned in to look. A faint glow from the streetlight spilled through the glass, and in the far corner of the cabin sat a woman in a long dress, rocking gently in a wooden chair. I could make out her profile, and I swear she looked like the woman in the photograph. Quickly moved the group along, and the idea that somebody might have broken in, especially with a bunch of kids in tow, was more frightening than any ghost. But when I returned later, the lock was secure. Windows showed nothing but a bare, empty floor. No chair. Never had been a chair in that cabin. These are just 3 of the stranger moments from my time as a ghost tour guide. Got a handful more. Most can be explained if you try hard enough. But every now and then, there are things that stick with you. And sometimes the silence speaks louder than the stories. Well, I appreciate that you went above and beyond at your job. Totally get it. The thing that waited outside. First, context. We lived in a house where things always felt just a little off. It wasn't loud or dramatic, just wrong in a quiet way. Every single friend or relative who'd even had the faintest sense of intuition, mostly the women in my family who grew up paying attention to gut feelings, unlike the men who would shrug everything off. Typical. Independently, they told me that something about the place made their skin crawl, especially the back part of the basement, which was fully underground, by the way. The house itself matters here, too, and had a main floor built above a basement. Basement partially open to the backyard and the side of the house. And my room was down there with a small window facing a thick tree line. The deck stretched across the back of the house, right above where the basement opened out. You could walk onto the deck from outside or through the living room and my parents' bedroom on the ground floor. Strange things happened often. I'll try to keep this short, but it's what happened at the end that's kind of lived rent-free in my brain now for years. For months, there were these knocking sounds on the basement glass doors and windows. It wasn't constant, but it was frequent enough that my friends could confirm I wasn't imagining it. The farther you went into the basement, the heavier the air got. Thick and unpleasant, like standing in a place where something bad had once happened. Or some really terrible, thick gravy. Sounds silly, I know, but it was a feeling that didn't go away. The knocks were never random. Always 3 to 5 raps and slow and deliberate. Decent bars, actually. They moved from one pane to the next as if something outside was pacing. No trees brushed the glass, and there wasn't wind, and it didn't sound like a branch or an animal. It felt like intention. Weirdly, it almost never really happened when my parents were home. They never heard a thing. My friends did, over and over again. I could accept a ghost story, I can accept weird noises, but what happens one night when I was alone can't file that away so easily. It was late and calm and quiet. I was lying in the bed in the basement, and my dog, a big protective one, curled at my feet. The knocking was worse than usual and sharper, and my dog was pretty tense. He had those sort of airplane ears. I love those. His whole body coiled like a spring. And sometimes when I got like this, he'd patrol the house growling into corners I couldn't see. Then came the footsteps, slow and heavy. And on the deck right above me, clear as day, I could tell it was boots. The kind with weight to them, maybe work boots. And that rhythm you don't really forget once you've heard it outside your house at night. My dog sprang up and bolted upstairs. I followed the sound with my ears, waiting for the footsteps to leave, but they just didn't. Nothing, just stillness. A called my mom, and she suggested we phone the neighbor instead of the police. They'd take too long anyway. The neighbor came, checked around, saw nothing. I ended up upstairs in my parents' bedroom with my dog, who was still rigid and still alert. The glass door leading to the deck was covered with a privacy film. It blurred details but didn't block out light or movement, really. I sat on the bed facing the door, trying to convince myself that was the worst that had passed. Then my dog growled, low, different from any sound I've ever heard from him. Not warning, but something more primal, and that's when I looked up. There was a face at the door. Except it wasn't a face, it was a pale shape pressed against the glass, about the height of a short adult or a child, but had no features, no nose or mouth or shadows where eyes should have been. I could always make out some contours through the privacy film, and this time there was nothing. Just smooth blank skin. It didn't turn or run, it slowly backed away as if satisfied that I'd seen it. Can't explain why, but this thing felt different. The knocks, they always gave off a taunting masculine energy. Tall and lanky and trickster-like. The boot steps felt dangerous and predatory, but this was worse. It was cold and feminine somehow. Not trickster, not predator, but just wrong, like it was pretending, or rather, not pretending to even be human anymore. If it weren't for my dog, the way he bristled and barked and wouldn't settle for hours, I might have convinced myself it was just a dream, but he felt it too. Even my parents noticed how rattled he was when they got home. So I searched for local legends, trying to find something or anything to explain what I saw. All I ever find are half-whispered stories about things best not named. None of it fits exactly. Maybe that's worse. I don't believe in monsters, and I want to believe it was just a stalker, some strange trick of the light. But the blank face pressed to the glass won't leave me, and the knocking never really stopped. It just maybe learned to wait. At least it's patient. The glow that shouldn't be there. I'll try to be quick here. This happened in 2020. It's when I was still in college. And that year, I'm working at a tiny cafe-style eatery on campus as a cashier. Mostly during the late shift between 6:30 and 11:30 p.m. Sometimes past midnight on weekends. It was usually just me and one other person. They handed the kitchen in the back and, well, they handled it rather. I was out in the front alone for the most of the night. Shift going as uneventfully as usual. I'd been making coffee drinks and taking orders for hours. Then this group walked in, 3 girls and 1 guy. All the girls had light brown hair, clearly not freshmen since I'd never seen them before. And at a campus as small as ours, unfamiliar faces were kind of rare. The guy stood out immediately. Not because of how he looked exactly. He was stocky, average height, dark hair, light tan skin, but something about him just felt off. The only visible thing that really caught my attention was his eyes, and they didn't seem to line up in the same direction. It's like they were slightly diverging, and they were dark and almost entirely pupil. Whoa. At first, I figured maybe it was a vision issue, like we couldn't focus properly. He moved a bit awkwardly and didn't make eye contact and sort of swayed when he stood there. But later I overheard him clearly commenting on how big one of the girls' sandwiches was. I knew he wasn't completely out of it. It was a hefty sandwich after all. Here's where it gets strange, though. The second he stepped into the cafe, before anybody even said anything, this wave of sensation just hit me. It was like an unexpected rush of euphoria, like catching a drug high out of nowhere. I didn't even have a better way to describe it. It wasn't attraction or curiosity or anything logical like that. It was like instant. Like his presence itself pressed a button in my brain. You gotta settle down. The closer he got, the stronger it became. When they came up to the register, I wasn't even talking to him. One of the girls ordered. I started to feel this intense ASMR tingling crawl up my scalp and down my neck. Real medical ASMR. I almost never get that unless somebody has a unique voice or whisper something deliberate. But these people hadn't said a word to me yet. The feeling lingered the entire time he stayed in the main dining area. Even when he walked into the adjoining lounge, it took minutes for the sensation to fade. I remember standing there, forcing myself to keep talking or taking orders, and was trying to act like nothing was wrong, but deep down just knowing that this was not normal. There's a difference between emotions that make sense, like a crush walking in, and emotions that feel like you've been switched on against your will. This was the second kind. Imagine walking down a crowded street and some random stranger walks by you, and in that 1 second your brain just lights up like fireworks for no reason. That's how bizarre it felt. And the way the girl sort of hovered around him. Man, I'm falling over myself because this is too funny. Laughing at things that he barely said only made it kind of creepier. It gave me this sick feeling in my stomach, like there was something underneath all of this that I wasn't seeing. And to this day, I have no idea why it happened. I told a few people, and they always give me skeptical looks. Honestly, I get it. It sounds ridiculous. But it felt forced, like his proximity itself altered something in the air around me. I can't explain it, and I can't shake it. Has anybody else ever experienced something like this? Because I can still not find myself having a rational explanation for that night. Some people say that they know what love is, and then they really fall in love. Those might be those fireworks you're feeling. I wonder how big that sandwich was, though. Sweet dreams. See ya.
Good evening, and welcome back to Paranormal M. Help us work the algorithm by dropping a comment below. We strive to bring you real accounts of paranormal activity on a daily basis, and work towards competing with larger channels through hard work and perseverance, and an adherence to our OP's telling of their story. Respond to stories, or leave your own 6 cents on the matter, or drop some love for the bump. A haunted marijuana farm. You may have guessed, but this took place in Colorado. The farm itself was way off the beaten path, which was perfect for growing a crop. People liked to steal, and it made it interesting for the only security guard there at night. It was apparently used to grow beans throughout the 1900s before some bright-eyed entrepreneurs bought it to get a foot in the cannabis business. It's completely surrounded by woods on all sides. Upon entering the complex, you're met with several old farmhouses. Only one was used for offices, while the other 2 were just storage. This was called the admin area, and it's on the north end of the property. To the east, west, and south, you have 3 growing fields, all approximately 100 acres. Just past the admin area, you have several greenhouses encompassed by a fence and a large garage attached to it. And that was used to be a greenhouse, but now holds supplies. Across the lot from that, another garage for farm equipment. So a very large area for one lone security guard. Now this was a brand new contract, so I had no one to show me around, and I was basically tasked with creating security procedures for the other guards to follow. To that end, I was working 7 days a week, 4 p.m. to 6 a.m., until I had everything ironed out. My first day, I do a walk through the place with my boss and the farm owner that is then left, pretty much leaving me on my own rather to figure it out. Thankfully, I did have a decent little office in the admin building, and they even had an 8-channel security system set up. So weeks go by, nothing weird has happened. Not even an off feeling. If anything, it was beyond peaceful. I figured out a good security routine and made a policy out of it for the new guards to follow. After that, life was easy. Do my checks, read Fanatic, watch YouTube, glance at cameras, repeat. I was doing just that at about 2 a.m. when I see a black mass jump over the greenhouse fence. I bolt up, lock my office, and run down there, weapon drawn. Now that may seem like a dramatic response, but I should be the only person for literally miles around. The main road is the only way by vehicle, and it's gated. Plus, the gate is right next to my office, so I would have heard or seen someone approach by vehicle. The foot traffic at that hour and in that location, well, it's probably not the mailman. I get to the greenhouse area gate and quietly let myself in. I start checking greenhouses one by one. After about 20 minutes, I find absolutely nothing. I find the camera in question and looked around the area but found nothing out of place. I end up doing my entire security check early just to be sure, and then head back to the office. I plan to review the footage because the fence is 8 feet tall with an additional foot of barbed wire across the top. That in itself freaks me out because I've been outside for over an hour before I realize the only thing that can clear that jump is a mountain lion. So I hustled back to my office. But my monitor is black. No signal found. The hard drive in the brand new DVR is fried. At this point, it's weird, but not necessarily paranormal. A few days go by. We get the hard drive replaced. All is well. It's probably around midnight, and I'm doing my checks by the backside of the greenhouse area, when out of nowhere, a blood-curdling scream, and it's damn close. My body goes cold. This very well could be the big cat I suspected from a few nights earlier. I find the nearest gate and let myself into the greenhouse area. Better in there than out in the open. But then I hear crying, unmistakably female, diaphragm shaking, snot slinging, weeping. That's not a cat. I almost wish it was, but I have to look. It's my job. Now behind the greenhouse area, there's a dirt road in front of the center field that circles all the way around it. This road connects to the perimeter road for the 2 side fields. Think of 3 big circles arranged in a loose shape of a triangle with the greenhouses in the middle. Well, this crying sounded like it was coming from that center road. I start to approach very slowly, and I can still hear it as clear as day. It's getting louder and louder the closer I get. It's almost nightmarish, until it just stops. So I stopped. I stayed there completely still for quite a long time. But there was nothing. People don't just stop sobbing. There's at least a sniffling, maybe that hiccup when you try to catch your breath. But it just went from wailing to nothing in one beat. After that, I always felt uncomfortable toward that back field. I heard the scream several more times after that, always around midnight, and always from that same area, but never went to investigate after my initial experience. By this time, harvesting has come. It's come and it's gone, and the fields are bare. I'm still needed, however, because they used the greenhouses throughout the winter. And as the seasons changed, so did my responsibilities. Rather than patrolling the fields, my focus was the greenhouses. Not just for theft, but also ensuring that the heaters continue to work throughout the cold nights. To this end, I took to parking my Jeep next to the greenhouse area so I didn't have to make a long trek through the snow from the security office to the greenhouses. I could see everything I needed from my driver's seat, and my Jeep heater was infinitely better than the little space heater in my office. I had a routine: start the Jeep, get it nice and hot, then turn it off. I kept my windows cracked because security work at night is 50% listening for weird shit. I didn't have to listen hard. A loud bang immediately removed any drowsiness I may have had. Something just hit my vehicle. I don't get out immediately. I took a good look around, listening for footsteps and checking my mirrors frantically, but there's nothing. Then it happens again, bang, on the roof of my Jeep, and dirt tumbles down my windshield. Someone's throwing dirt clumps at me? I call my supervisor and explain what's going on. She says she's on her way and she'll be there in about a half an hour. She's working at another farm not too far away. I reached to the passenger seat and grabbed my spotlight. The big kind of spotlight, 1,000 lumens, allowed me to see the back of every field. The kinds of spotlights that'll land you in jail if you shine it at a plane. I hop out of my Jeep and climb onto the roof. It had to have come from the back field. I began panning back and forth with my handheld beam of daylight. I don't immediately see anybody, so I start with the verbal commands. Come out! You're trespassing! Announce yourself! I'm authorized to use lethal force! Yada yada. No response. I stay posted up until my supervisor arrives. We decided to walk the perimeter of all 3 fields and found absolutely nothing. By this time, it's almost 3 a.m. and we're back at my Jeep talking and smoking. Then a whistle. Like that playful 2-tone whistle that says, I'm over here. My supervisor just gave me this look like, seriously? I told her that's the kind of thing I deal with at this place. She stuck around for the rest of the shift, but nothing else happened. It stayed quiet until Christmas Day, when I picked up a shift for that sweet holiday pay. I also opted to stay in the office for the sake of my Jeep. That's when the music started. Long, flowing classical music that you might hear playing quietly at a fancy party. I listened, then stood up and listened some more. Walked to the doorway of the security office and stopped to listen again. It's still there. I stepped out and it stops. I pause to dead silence. I step back into my office and I can hear it again. I poke my head out and it stops. I lean back in and it starts again. It was almost cartoonish. It went on for quite a while and gradually faded away. There's nothing in that old building that plays music. No radio, PA systems, and no one had forgotten a cell phone. It wasn't my phone, as I had actually tried to record it, but picked up nothing but white noise. I walked outside in the off chance that it was coming from miles away, but yet again nothing, and I only ever heard that music on Christmas Day. After that, I'd actually gotten permission to bring my husky to work, and he loved the farm, especially in the snow. But some nights he wouldn't leave my side. He would actually growl at things I had no perception of. Which is strange if you own a husky. The strangest thing about that place was that you could tell if it was going to be a normal night or not when you got there. Some days the atmosphere was just different. A lot of other things happened there, but those were the big ones. If I get decent response on here, I may share a few more stories from my time in the Marines, or during my time as a cop. I implore you to do so, sir. Cops chasing shadows in the old courthouse. I was at a loss with what to do with my life after getting out of the Marines. I took quite a bit of time off from being a responsible adult in an attempt to decompress from 6 years of intense structure. Shortly thereafter, I realized I couldn't function properly without that structure. Just like that, Facebook targeted me with a life advertisement. Like it had read my thoughts. My small town city police department is looking for a full-time patrol officer. Makes sense. It's the closest I'll ever get to the fulfillment of serving one's country, serving my community instead. Being a cop would give me the structure and order I needed. I could even help people on a more personal level, more than I ever felt I did as a Marine. It just made sense, so that's what I did. Interviews, background checks, drug tests in the academy, and then I was in. Sort of. I may have been a sergeant of Marines, but a few medals to display in an oak shadow box, but now I'm just a rookie. As such, I have to ride with the field training officer. I may have graduated the academy, but that's only the basics. Boot camp, so to speak. Now I'm partnered to a veteran cop with 15 plus years on the force. Officer, I'll call him D for privacy, was easily respected. Firm but fair. By the book, and seemed to know everything about anything. I couldn't have found a better training officer. He recognized that I had, what it was exactly that I'd done in life up until that point and respected me for it. Treated me like an adult. I couldn't ask for more, so the months went by. We responded to car accidents, domestic calls, disputes of all kinds, and even a few funny, in my opinion, calls. Like a lady hitting her husband over the head with a ladle because he said her chili was bad. A story for another time, perhaps. So, we worked the night shift. Less chaotic for a new guy, I suppose. Part of our duties was checking up on the local government buildings throughout the night. I may have mentioned it was a smaller town, but we had recently had a new courthouse and jail built. The old courthouse was repurposed into a lot of smaller offices, DMV, water board, county clerk, registrar of property deeds. The attached old jail was for the most part simply abandoned. The old jail was connected to the old courthouse by a third-story sky bridge. I guess the idea was if you were sentenced to jail time, you could march right into that jail. It was a quiet night, and on one particular shift, Officer D suggests that we should knock out our nightly checks before things inevitably get not so quiet. It's about midnight, so we cruise over to the old courthouse to get started. We pull right up to the main entrance, and I get out and approach the doors like I'd done for months already. Just a quick tug to make sure it's secure, but the door swings open. From the cruiser, I hear the straight-laced Officer D simply state, "Fuck." My eloquent response is, "Why fuck?" See, the courthouse, old or new, is the sheriff's department's domain. When it's found unlocked in the middle of the night, it means getting the sheriff out of bed. So that's what we did, and Sheriff J did not disappoint. This man showed up wearing pajama pants and a gun. He called a few sheriff's deputies in the area to assist because we now have to go into this large 3-story building and search the entire thing to ensure nobody's wandered in. Eerie does not even begin to describe it. You know what I mean if you've ever been inside of a mall or a school well beyond after hours. A place normally bustling with activity being so still and so quiet is disconcerting. But nevertheless, we had a job to do. So myself, Officer D, 2 sheriff's deputies, and our pajama-clad sheriff began to sweep the first floor of the building. One thing I did notice is that the place had those motion-activated hallway lights that click on one by one as you progress further in. Other than that little observation, it was routine. On the second floor, more offices. Some I knew, some I didn't. No sign of anyone or anything out of place. We've more or less split up at this point to cover more ground a little quicker. It's clear that Sheriff J would like to go back to sleep. I turned a corner and I met with a long, dark hallway. No office doors in sight. Just a single door at the end, with a sign identifying it as a stairwell. On the right side of the hall were many large windows overlooking the parking lot. I began the trek to the stairwell, glancing out the windows down at our cruisers, then up to the 3rd floor. I met with the same hallway as the floor below. Windows now on my left as I moved towards the main hall. This is where all the old courtrooms are. Going into the first courtroom, I was met with a once majestic and dignified room reduced to an oversized and disorganized filing cabinet. Manila folders stacked high as far as the eye could see. It was a hoarder's dream and downright perilous to walk through. I wanted to check out the old sky bridge, but it was sealed up tight. Oh well, I search the room as best as I can and I find nothing. So I stumble out of that life-sized game of bureaucratic Jenga and move on. But it looks like the other guys already finished up the other 2 courtrooms and were waiting for me. We came up empty-handed. Well, that was the best-case scenario. So we head back down to the 1st floor and leave out the main entrance. Sheriff J securing the doors behind us. We congregate by the cruisers and we were swapping stories about what each of us saw. It's not every day that you get to explore an old courthouse at night, after all. The minutes tick by and the building has long since gone dark. The lights turning off with the lack of motion to activate them. Until one did. On the third floor, and another in succession, as if someone was walking the hallway as I just had, not 15 minutes before. 5 law enforcement officers stood stock still watching this happen until the entire hall was illuminated once more. Then, as the last light activated, a dark figure peered around the edge of the window and then leaned back out of sight. A moment of hesitation from everyone present before Sheriff J charged the door, jamming the key in and whipping the door open. The sheriff and his deputies ran to the left staircase while Officer D and I burst into the right stairwell. We rushed to the 3rd floor and both groups stopped at each end of the main hall for a moment. We had just ran down the side hall where this person or thing just was. It was a lot colder than before. I stayed at the L intersection on my side, while the deputy stayed at the L intersection at the opposite end. These are the only 2 staircases in the whole building, no elevators either. So we have this person cornered. Sheriff J, Officer D, and the other deputy then meticulously start clearing the courtrooms again. I stayed at my intersection, constantly looking between the younger deputy across from me and the hallway that had already begun to go dark again. It was a tense 20 minutes. Felt like days. But the 3 senior cops came out of the last courtroom looking baffled. Sheriff J, now looking more than awake, signaled our departure. We once again left the building, locking it behind us. There wasn't much talking like before, but each one of us took one last long look at that hallway before leaving. Business as usual. Let me say one thing. In my 35 years on this earth, I've seen some unusual things. I never went looking for ghosts. I didn't go to bed one night hoping that the thing that came to say hello was going to stand at my window, gurgling an ancient language I could not and did not want to understand. I didn't ask to spend an awful weekend with the possessed girl. I did not want to keep waking up to the sound of hysterical laughter and sobs, running to the door only to wake on the couch 3 more times, each time the entity drawing closer. Stuck in a loop that I could not escape. I didn't want 6 months of bad luck brought upon me by an owl. I didn't care to see the large sloth-like creature casually passing through my living room upon waking from a nap. The ghosts at work several times, I didn't want any of it. At first, these things scared me. By the time the event I will discuss today took place, couldn't give a damn. I had been living in Miami for a few years. I wanted to go back home, to the Panhandle, to start a band with my uncle. Things down south had downward spiraled enough, and it was time to move on. So I packed my guitars and a few personal belongings and hit the road north in my truck. I moved in with my Mimi and my uncle in Havana, a small town outside of Tallahassee, not far from Greenwood, where my last post took place, not far from my hometown. It was great being with family. My uncle and I started working on new songs. He bought a new computer, microphones, and all this for recording music, and life felt better than it had in a long while. I had put myself through the ringer and was ready to focus on making music and just existing and trying to be healthier. I slept in the room where we recorded our songs. Across the hall was my uncle's room. I woke up one night to discover a dark figure stooped in the doorway. The light from the computer allowed me to see how defined its shape was. I could clearly see the shape of its head, slim and black as night. It just stood there, hunched over. It was tall, most likely 10 feet or so. I knew it had woke me up on its own to try and solicit a reaction from me. It wanted my fear. I'm hip to the grift. Gonna take a lot more than that to get anything out of me. I'm more scared of people than I am of these entities. It waited there, expecting me to give it what it desired, my fear. It was just hungry and looking for sustenance. At this point in my life, I didn't really care. I had come to the conclusion that strange visitors were going to show up from time to time. I had something along the lines of, quote-unquote, "Fuck off, I'm trying to sleep, get out of here." I turned over on my mattress and fell asleep shortly after telling it to leave. The next morning, I woke up and found my uncle sitting on the porch steps in the back deck having a cigarette. I greeted him and lit my own. "Man, I had something weird happen last night," I told him. His expression became solemn. "Let me tell you what happened to me first," he said. He began to explain. He had woke up in the middle of the night to a figure hovering over him. He told me that it felt like it was trying to suck the light out of him, or the life out of him, just through his mouth. He pushed at the air above him and felt resistance, like something was there, but not fully solid. He ran outside and waited a while before he could bring himself to go back inside. My uncle doesn't make things up. He's a straightforward guy. I trust him and I know that he's telling me exactly what happened to him. He had never had something like this happen to him before. When I told him that I saw the dark figure in my room, he looked baffled. We both knew that we were having a visitor that night. My uncle was very much worried about it then, but I assured him that we would be all right. He was worried about it coming back and messing with his mother and my Mimi. Never returned, though. Not that I really care anyway. Business as usual. Owls everywhere. I spent a large portion of my time in the forest, and being from a small town in the mountains with nothing else ever going on, always have. Not to mention it was always an escape from the chaotic home life growing up in the train wreck that was most of my 20s. I would hike up the 20 miles or so some days, being able to just walk down the road to the edge of town and into the woods where sometimes I'd even be out well into the night before returning. A cold spring evening in 2020 was one of those nights which I still think of often. On the particular day, I had hiked farther and into a newer area of the mountain that I'd never been to prior. As it grew dark, I decided to stay out and keep exploring, reaching into my backpack, grabbing my headlamp. Sometime later, slightly after midnight, I'd say I was walking pretty grown to the trail when, up ahead in the middle of the path, my headlight caught a shiny orangish-red glimmer, reflecting back in the light. At first, I didn't think anything of it, as it was probably just glass or something somebody had dropped on the path. But as I approached, I noticed that there was actually 2 orange dots, until stopping probably just 5 feet away, could clearly see it was not glass, but a small brown owl. I froze, not wanting to spook it, but also wondering why it was flying away. It just sat there staring at me, moving its head side to side in that fluent owl motion. Not sure how long this whole exchange lasted, but eventually the owl just turned calmly, then flew away. I continued on deeper down this trail, thinking about how cool and lucky I was to have that rare kind of face-to-face with an owl like that. The wind started to pick up, and I could tell I was getting closer to the side of the mountain. I also started to see flashes of light like orbs, first just in the corner of my peripherals, but then more direct. Red and yellow, then streamed by quickly up the trees. I figured it just to be an eye shine again, maybe from another owl, or even the flying squirrels, which are nocturnal and common in my area. That was until, ahead in the darkness and coming towards me, were two large yellow orb-shaped lights. These were on my height level and moving side to side in a swaying motion, I remember. Instantly, I interpreted this as flashlights, and that perhaps I'd wandered onto somebody's private property or something. I'll add now to these lights were more of a glow and not a beam projected out like a flashlight. I instinctively just turned and ran, not wanting to deal with any bullshit or get in trouble. I shut off my headlamp once I got down to this other, more defined trail, and I kept on without much problem, as it was just about a full moon and quite bright. I continued on down the hill until my foot clipped a big tree root, sticking up in the path and sent me tumbling. I sat up and looked back to see if I saw any lights following me, and after a minute, flicked back on my headlamp to see where I was at. The trees were now much larger, older growth, with less brush in between them. Then, as I looked up, my heart stopped in disbelief of what I was seeing. The light from my lamp shone into the old trees, revealing owls. Dozens and dozens of owls amongst the branches and in the hollows. Their eyes are reflecting back fiery red at me. Every which way I turned, owls perched on the trees, more silently flying in to join, all looking at me. This is where things get strange. The last thing I clearly remember was just in addition to the insanity and disbelief, a strengthening sense of unease and almost doom, I'd like to say. From that point on, my memory becomes patchy. I just entered this weird, foggy, almost dreamlike state. I vaguely recall walking through the thick rhododendron bushes and climbing on rocks well off any path in the middle of the woods. I was slow and sluggish, without really thinking of processing what I was doing, just like on autopilot. This lasted through the remainder of the night, and as the sky shifted to a slowly brightening dark bluish purple, I kinda snapped back. Not entirely everything felt heavy. I remember, and I decided I just was going to start on my way back, but not thinking anything of the strange things that had just occurred, causing me to lose several hours, and the remainder of the night. Walking back, I fell into that mindless, foggy autopilot-like state again. I'd be following the old railroad bed which trenched miles for a good portion of the way back, but would randomly walk off into the woods, through thorns and over trees and other debris. I was walking through one particular spot where a spring divided and cut through, making little islands you'd have to hop onto over the water. At one point I stopped. Looking up ahead higher up on the bank, I see a man standing there facing me. He was dressed in what I can remember looking to be that of an older style, like turn of the century, specifically a long ratty brown overcoat and a larger bowler cap, which also cast a shadow over the face, leaving no details there to be seen. Instantly, the man lunged towards me, sprinting at full speed, but completely unaffected by all the thorns and bushes and huge downed trees and flowing streams between us. It was like they weren't even there. I could also feel the ground shaking and the heavy thump of his feet slamming the ground with force. Still in that fog dream state, I just stood there watching him approach, feeling absolutely nothing. I was completely numb. I didn't care at all. The man then crashed right into me, through me. I didn't flinch or anything, but I also wasn't affected physically by this either. The man literally ran through me and was gone. I continued on the rest of my way home, still absent-minded and still detouring from time to time to waddle through brush and bushes for no apparent reason. Finally, I made it home. It was still morning and the darker out now, but with a light snow falling. I opened my front door through the backpack and slumped onto the couch, exhausted. Then I noticed something strange on the coat rack by the front door. It only took a moment to get the full picture of what it was, and again, it had kind of an emotional effect on me. I believe, rather, what he's writing is, it had no emotional effect on me. Hanging on the coat rack was the man from earlier, although this time it was only a torso and a head. He hung by the back of his overcoat, which was ratty and torn, and his head with two oversized black pits where his eyes would be, and his jaw slacked, dropping heavy to the side, almost like it was disconnected and hanging in place by pale bluish skin. As I stated before, this garnered no reaction from me. I did turn my head away a few times, rubbing my eyes, then looking back where the man still hung. I sat there and then staring at him as he faced me. His absence of eyes made it hard to know if he was staring back. Then slowly I drifted off to sleep in the presence of this corpse hanging across from me, without a care in the world. For a week after all this happened, I saw owls and everything. Spots in the walls would form into owls. The letters on license plates and pictures, TV, wherever I'd see owls, they were forming out of random things or just there in general. I ran to the door. I was 20 years old, living in Auburn, Alabama. I'm 35 now. This took place at an apartment where my friend and bandmate's girlfriend lived. We stayed that night. I woke on the couch one morning to a strange sound. It was coming from the kitchen, which was separated by the living room by a 14-foot hallway. The sound was like a young woman laughing and crying hysterically. It sounded wrong. I was immediately alarmed, and I rose up from the couch and sprang toward the front door to make a quick exit. I turned the doorknob. I woke up on the couch. Again, the sound of laughing and crying was closer now, in the hallway. I jumped up, ran to the door, turned the doorknob, and you guessed it, right back on the couch. This time, the sound was directly behind me. I couldn't get up to run towards the door this time. Whatever this was had some sort of hold on me. I did the only thing I could do, which was pull the covers over my head. I stayed there with this thing behind me with its strange laugh and cry, and eventually I woke up on the couch. Everything was normal upon waking up the fourth time. I told my friends about this, and they thought it was strange, but chalked it up to a weird dream. To this day, I swear I was awake. I've had weird dreams, but this wasn't the same. It stood at my window. It was 2007. I was 19 years old, living in an old country home in the town of Greenwood, Florida. Beautiful wood floors, large front porch, a nice back deck. It was built in the late 1800s. One night I was home by myself. My two roommates were out and about in the next town over. I decided to get some sleep. The head of my bed was up against the wall of the room. There was a big window at the head of the bed. My back deck was to the left of me, directly on the other side of the wall. The home is built up off the ground. You could get under the deck as it was open. We used it to store rakes, shovels, and a couple 5-gallon buckets. I first heard it run into the yard from the field, heavy and fast, like hooves on the ground. It ran under the porch, and I heard it knock over one of the buckets. It came straight to my window. It stood at my window. The foot of the window was up off the ground about 4 or 5 feet. It was a tall window, as the house had tall ceilings. This visitor must have been 8 or 9 feet tall. It began making a sound, a low growling language that was completely unlike anything I'd ever heard. It was not an animal, and it was far from human. It put me in a trance. I couldn't move. I didn't particularly want to move to alert it of my presence. But it knew I was there. Why else had it come to my window but to say hello? It must have seen me before, or could just smell me. I barely even drew a breath. How long I lay there with it speaking through my window, I'm unsure. 10 to 20 minutes is my guess. Its voice was terrible. Exactly what you would expect an evil thing must sound like. Over and over it spoke to me. I'd never felt fear like this in my life, knowing that it stood inches from me, separated only by the old thin pane of glass. It still fills me with dread, but I'm also filled with wonder. It eventually ran off. I heard its departure just as I'd heard its arrival. It was a tall thing and must have some weight to it. The next morning I looked under the back desk. A 5-gallon bucket was on its side and sticking out the deck, knocked over just as I knew it would be. There's nothing but wood for miles behind that house, pasture and woods stretching along the highway till Kingdom Come. Down that highway about 40 miles is my childhood home where I live today. The thing that came to greet me is still out there as far as I know. Wouldn't take long for it to get here. Does it know I'm here? Will it ever visit me again? The thought sends chills down my spine. Finally making communication. So there have been some paranormal experiences I and my family have experienced in our house. I first noticed it around 2 years ago. I was in the garden and I was home alone. I had this feeling to look up, and in the window I saw a figure. I was stunned, but it's never scared me. They've knocked photos down, rolled objects, and made noises. Whenever something happens, I try and talk. In other words, a room spray bottle was knocked off the shelf upstairs, whilst me and my were downstairs. You guys decide. So I got it, sprayed the room, and said, "Hope that's better. Please don't knock things over." There was no way it fell off, and my mom and I have tried debunking it. Lots of things have happened. If I go through each, I'll be typing for hours, but everyone in my house has experienced something. My mom knocked on the door and she felt and heard something knock back on the other side. I was there and we both were kind of like, damn, okay, guess they are here right now. My sister saw somebody coming up the stairs and thought it was me, since it was just the both of us home. But when she looked, it disappeared in front of her eyes. Whenever something happens, I'm not really scared. I don't feel attacked or uncomfortable. It's just life and death, I guess. I got an auto-scan radio for doing the Estes method, and so far I've got "your mother," in quotes. Then when I asked about what my mother and my children, I got "why." My mom thinks there's a possibility that it's my dad who died 9 months ago, but this is all slowly starting around 2 years ago, so I don't really think it's likely. I want to be able to understand why they're here and what their intent is. It's done nothing to harm me that I know of. I don't know if they're going to interfere with my life or if they're just going to continue vibing behind the veils. If there's anything I need to know or a way I might need to protect myself, my family and my house, please let me know. Also, if more information is needed about experiences, also please let me know about that. Kids playing. This happened when I was 26. I was living with my ex. At the first week I was staying there, I just felt heavy whenever I'm at the house. I always hear footsteps running up and down the stairs, even when I was alone in the house. I told my ex-boyfriend about it, and he never believed me. One night when we were sleeping, I had a dream. I was facing an old mirror, and I'm looking at myself with long hair. I have short hair at that time. And my surroundings were pitch black. The only light that I saw that time was on me, and I can barely see myself in front of the mirror. Then a child's hand came out of nowhere, and it was brushing my hair. I even had a nightmare about running from a girl. and I was running as fast as I could, but whenever I open the door, I keep on running in the same room without any windows on it. My ex-boyfriend never believed in me when one night we were sleeping together and were talking while sleeping, and when I woke up, I started to wake him up as well and asked if he was talking to me while we were sleeping. He said yes. That's when he started to tell me about his nightmare that he had sitting in the middle of the room upstairs, and a guy with a cloak put a bag on his head, speaking words he can't understand. There are 3 other guys circling him, and the same guy who put the bag on his head started to throw a pile of blood on his head. Everything stopped when the house was blessed. Whenever I see kids on an abandoned house or anything like that, it scares the shit out of me because of that. I'm good with seeing anything else, which I also do, but I don't want to experience being played by a kid anymore. Ghosts and entities. I, a 26-year-old female, used to stay at my friend's, 35-year-old female's house in Alabang, here in the Philippines. Since I'm currently working in a different city from my place, the first time I stayed there, I'm always having headaches and it feels like the energy in the house is heavy. I didn't mind it at first, but things got worse than I expected. I never experienced any of this from any other place. It all started there. I always sleep on the bed with my friend, and it always feels like somebody is watching me. I always shrugged off that feeling at first. Then I keep on seeing a woman with long hair and a white dress watching me sleep. I always wake up at 3 a.m. and it scares the shit out of me. I ignored it at first, but one time I woke up and she was beside the bed, standing, and when I checked her face, her head is crooked and she was looking at me. I immediately shook my friend to wake her up and she said that no one was there. I keep on seeing her and even had a nightmare about it, so I got used to it. I asked my friend since I keep on getting headaches whenever I walk the hall beside the stairs, and that's when she told me the story of the house. The last owner of the house hung herself on the 2nd floor. I got chills after hearing those stories. I even told her to get rid of the doll facing the stairs that leads to that room. Since I got used to her, I just always try to ignore her when she's there. Then one time I was preparing my coffee at 3 a.m. And if I didn't walk on the hallway beside the stairs to go to the kitchen, I had to go around the dining area with the big mirror in it, like the mirror that you have at a dance studio or a ballet studio. I'm done with my coffee, so I decided to go back to our room. When I was walking back to our room, I was looking outside and I saw a black figure besides the pool with a yellow glowing eye. We were staring at each other for like 15 seconds, because I want to make sure that I'm actually seeing something real, but I was frozen on what I saw. I walked and acted normally. When I went back to the room, I decided to wake up my friend and I was just shaking. So yeah, that's when it all started. So whenever I'm in a different house or a different place, I always choose to go home instead of staying in an unfamiliar place. I'm starting to believe in past lives after this. Has anyone had any similar experiences to mine? So as a preface, I've always been drawn to Europe and 1980s and early 90s since I was young. 80s and early 90s era Eastern Europe in particular has always fascinated me for some odd reason. Ever since I was around 10, I've listened to 80s era pop music from the former USSR, and I felt a connection to it and a bizarre nostalgic feeling from it despite the fact that I'm in my 20s and I grew up in the US. So I'd have no reason to feel any connection to it, and I've been into 80s fashion since I was young, and for some reason it feels way more natural to me than contemporary stuff. Apparently, the way I dress is so accurate to what people typically wore back then that my mother, who's about 60, has told me that when she's seen some of the stuff that I wear, that she remembers seeing people wearing clothing like that when she was younger. Besides that, I'm weirdly able to copy, don't know how to say this word, Cyrillic writing and letters as neatly, if not neater, than I copy English, despite the fact that I never learned or know any other languages besides English. I never thought anything of these facts until recently, since I've always been a skeptic, and I lean towards atheism. But after what happened a couple of weeks ago, I'm really starting to question things. So a couple of weeks ago, I stumbled upon some videos of Riga from the 90s and early 2000s, and everything just felt weirdly familiar despite the fact I'd never seen Riga up to that point. Then in one of the videos I saw an old bridge. It shocked me, because it looked exactly like the one I saw in my dream I had a year ago. Also, in that same dream, I remember driving to an old glass market hall near the water. And weirdly enough, because I was curious, I Googled it, and there's a market hall in Riga. And apparently there is, and it reminded me of the one in my dream, and it's also located by the water like in my dream. All of this is honestly kind of creeping me out and making me question if I had a past life or if this is just a bunch of bizarre coincidences. Did my friend's doppelganger just try to kill me? Happened last week, but the situation is still ongoing. I pranked a friend by stealing his phone and returning it the next day. It was all good, some laughs and high fives. The next day, they approached me, asking me to ride with them and go look for his phone, the same phone that I pranked him with. He apparently lost it in a motorcycle crash the night before. He has bruises and wounds on his face, between his eyebrows, nose, bridge, and upper lip. He was very persistent but also polite, but I can feel something different. He can't look straight to my face and he was stuttering, and he just points to the direction where he crashed and lost the phone when I asked him, instead of saying the name of the place. It's a small town where everybody knows everyone and everybody knows the whole place. I asked him where the motorcycle that he used was, and he said it was a friend's motorcycle, and he said it was damaged very badly. Please remember this part about my other friend's motorcycle. And also, by the way, I just kind of laughed it off with my mom. How can one get those frontal bruises from an off-balance motorcycle accident as he claims? I would imagine like erased dimples and sideburns. You get it. I'm not sure though. I said I can't go with him. He's still pleading. Then my mom came out and I said I can't. Got some errands to do with my mom. He looked surprised, as if he didn't expect that I was with anybody. He was clearly disappointed and he left. Then I thought it was going to be a quote-unquote normal evening, but the next night I came upon my friend with a clean face, no bruises. The phone was in his hands. Couldn't process it, and I went home still dumbfounded. Then came the bad news. My buddy did get into an accident. Pictures came in from when he got taken to the ER and now the ICU. And he has this frontal wound, forehead, nose bridge, lips and all. He was all right that night. 2 stars written here. About the part with Jay's motorcycle, and why I'm connecting this is because the doppelganger directly said that he crashed. Said that the motorcycle was there and just brushed it off. He was using Jay's motorcycle that night. But when I looked and asked, Jay's bike was sold long ago. I so want my friend to survive just because, but also to confirm that he was with G that night and that the accident was a freak accident. Confusing story. Strange occurrence on the res. While vacationing in Florida back in 2018, I crossed from the west side to the east side of Florida to get to Route 1 to the Keys. I stopped at a gas station on the west to the east road and got gas. A young guy filled me up, about 12 or 13. I asked him if his dad owned the station, and he said, "No, the res." I realized that I was on a reservation. I had to pee, so after I gassed up, I parked my car and headed towards the ladies' room. It was on the side. I saw a lady go in, about 10 or 15 feet in front of me. I stood outside and waited. Another lady came up a few minutes later and asked me if there was somebody in there. I said yes. We waited a few minutes more, and the lady said, "She's been in there a long time. Are you sure someone's in there?" I said, "Yeah, I saw her go in." I knocked on the door. Nothing happened, so I turned the knob and it was locked. The lady left to go get the key. A lady came out and unlocked the door. I knocked again and nothing happened, so I opened the door. The room was empty and only had a small window high up. I was confused and felt around the walls, wondering if she fell through like on a Twilight Zone. I washed my hands and left, but the lady didn't say anything and just went in. But you guys, I saw that lady go in that restroom on the res. I saw her. Unexplained happenings from 2022 till today. Last year, I was 4 months postpartum and had a girls' night out, ending up getting a hotel room. Well, we went to sleep, and a couple hours later, I woke up with all the lights. They were all off except the bathroom light. I saw my quote-unquote friend walking to the bathroom, so I just went to turn around, and we were sharing a bed since it was cheaper. I remember thinking, wait, her hair is really long and it's dark, but my friend is super blonde and that hair looked black. Well, I turned all the way and my friend was still sleeping, and I'm about to flip my lid. I grabbed my purse and pepper spray. I think a woman got into our room, so I quietly walked to the bathroom and there's no one. The door's still locked. I checked everywhere, no intruder, nothing. Okay, maybe it was just a fluke. I did have a shot while playing pool, first drink in more than a year at that point, but now for today. I'm putting my son, he'll be 2 in 4 weeks, down for bed, and his toddler bed is pushed up against our bed, and the wall he's standing just trying to get to our bed like a kid and he wants to cuddle. I'm holding strong like, nope, gotta sleep like a big boy. But he stops freaking out and looks past me and starts smiling and waving. So our door is behind me, so my first thought is that maybe his dad's came in and just trying to help put him down, hearing him freak. I turn around and 1, I see the door still closed, and 2, something like an adult shadow moved across the wall towards the TV. I'm like, nope, my son's already across the bed and trying to let me hold him while he's now blowing kisses on the other side of the room. I get the hell out of there and I go get my fiance. We're back in the room now while I type this, and my son's now sleeping, but damn, am I crazy? My first and only paranormal encounter. When I was a kid around 8 years old, I lived in a townhouse across the street from a nursing home. The setting of day was night. My parents instructed me to take a shower. The bathroom was upstairs and everyone was downstairs, including my brother, so I was completely alone. I had to face my fears of being alone, so I did what I was told. I'm upstairs now, taking a shower. Everything's normal. Things took a change when I had to gather my clothes from my room down the hall. I stepped out into the hallway and saw what appeared to be a misty, soft glow by my doorway. It appeared to be tall, but I couldn't make out a shape. It was an apparition, something that my eyes had never seen. I was stuck. I couldn't take my eyes off the apparition. It felt like an eternity, but something in my soul told me to run, mostly out of fear of the unknown. I ran downstairs to my parents, distraught and butt naked. I told them that something was upstairs, Naturally, they went to investigate. Long story short, my parents felt like something had just been watching them. But my scare confirmed their suspicions. My aunt ended up coming over to bless the house, but we moved a few months after that incident. I have a scary one. I have a creepy memory that I had between the ages of 14 and 18. In my culture, we call them jinns, and almost everyone has such a memory. I'll write the incident in a way that it's a little bit from myself using a little bit of translation, and I apologize in advance for any parts that are not understood. No worries, dude. If I will return to the subject, at that time I started to experience this along with a lot of problems, such as domestic violence, depression, anxiety, and all that. This made me sink even deeper. I'll try to keep it as short as possible because it'll be a long series of events. There was a dream I used to have all the time, and in my dream I was walking down a street, came across a small house, and from the outside it looked like it was just a room. Then I entered this house, and the house is huge from the inside, like a really big mansion. When I open the door, a long corridor welcomes me. I start walking nervously. The house looks very gothic and depressing aesthetically. As I walk along, even though I'm scared, I start to hear quiet footsteps behind me, and when I look, I don't see anyone. As I walk, I see a few trinkets, faded flowers, and I ask myself why this house is like this. Someone calls out to me when I turn around. I see that there's no one again. I try to go back to the corridor, and I walk down because I'm extremely scared, but I can't find the outer door, and this scares me even more. As I run in a panic, looking for the exit door, a vase tips over and breaks behind me. Something starts chasing me. When I turned around because I want to face it, I don't know how, but it disappears, and when I turn around again, I feel it close enough to grab me by the hair and pull me to the ground. This is the dream in general, and I had the same dream for about 4 years. I was 14 years old when I first started having it, and I had this dream 2 to 3 times a year. But as I got older, I started having it more and more often, and by the time I was 16, I was having dreams every night where something was chasing me till the morning. I didn't feel the need to tell my parents because it was just a dream and it wasn't something I thought they would be interested in at the time. I didn't tell anybody that I saw the reflection of this dream in real life. One night in my dream, 5 people, and I don't know how I know this, but 4 men and 1 woman, they were chasing me, and the woman threw a stone at the back of my leg, and I woke up with that fall. When I wake up, I was wearing shorts and pajamas. When my mother came and just saw what happened at the back of my leg and looked at my leg, realized that the place where the stone hit was blue. Then one day when we were gathering with my friends, when I put the glass in my hand on the kitchen counter in front of everyone's eyes, the glass hit the opposite wall and crumbled right in front of our eyes. I don't even remember how we escaped from the kitchen, but a lot of absurd events like this. I started to feel someone next to me all the time. Someone started to talk to me in my head all the time. But most of the time it was just noise in my head, like when you're sitting in an overcrowded place and people's voices blend together. When I was alone, I was constantly surrounded by things that scared me a lot, like cabinet doors opening, books falling off the shelves, but when I told my family, I don't think they would believe me. And that's exactly what happened. I got an answer like, "You're trying to attract attention." Since the situation was not resolved and there was nothing I could do on my own, I started to live with this invisible friend and decided not to bring up my issue with my family ever again. However, things started to get uglier. I started not sleeping at night out of fear, and if I did, I would always have the same dream. When I went to bed, this thing would lie next to me. Whenever I fell asleep, it would shake me and it would wake me up, and since it wasn't a period when I was mentally healthy, I slowly started having suicidal and similar thoughts. I felt like no one else loved me but him. But at the same time, I was extremely worried that one day I would see him physically. And if I did, I would go crazy. There's so many things I know about him, but I don't even know how I know them. Over the years, I got used to his presence. Suicidal thoughts became too much. I was in a very severe depression, and the medication I was taking were not helping at all. I decided to bring up the subject to my family again. I told my father about the events, and it was a cathartic moment. And I didn't want to die because I couldn't get this thought out of my head. Do something about it. Then they resolved the issue, and I got rid of this friend. I'm now 25 years old, and I have interesting mystical properties. I can read people. My senses are extremely strong. But I shelved this feature a long time ago because I didn't want to get too involved because of what you went through.